Hi, it's Craig with Craig's To-Do List, and I'm here to talk about author Tessa Wegert. Did I say it right?
Yes, you
Tessa
did.
Wegert is a locally inspired author. She's the author of a series of detective slash thrillers that all take place in the Thousand Islands. The newest one, which I'm devouring at the moment, it's called Devil's at the Door. It's set in Alexandria Bay, and the cool thing is for everyone who lives around the area, she actually has the dedication to the people of Alex Bay. All the novels take place in this area. She's doing a book launch of this locally on Saturday. So all the people that are at the parade on December 2nd in Clayton. She will be there at the little bookstore. So Tessa, welcome and talk a little bit about the protagonist and how this series of books came about.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me, Craig. Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about the books, of course, because they're all set in the Thousand Islands area, an area that I've been visiting for about 20 years now. I actually grew up in Canada, but my husband's parents have a place on a little island near Alex Bay. And so for years I visited. And when I kind of gave myself a personal challenge about 6 or 7 years ago to write a murder mystery, what better place to set it than on a kind of isolated remote island during a storm with a dysfunctional family? Not that my husband's family is dysfunctional in the least, but the setting was very much inspired by my time there. And so that was the first book in the series, which is called Death in the Family. And now we're at the fifth book, which is Devil's at the Door. And yes, it comes out next week. And so the whole entire series is really about Shayna Merchant. She is a former NYPD homicide detective. She has a very traumatic abduction experience involving the serial killer that she has been hunting down in New York. So with the very first book, you learn that she's now moved up to the Thousand Islands with her fiance, who's from the area. And her hope is that she will have a much more quiet life there, but she misses police work. So she ends up working with the New York State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation. So she is the protagonist throughout all of the books in the series, which, although it is a series, they can all be read as standalones as well.
So that's really cool. So talk a little bit about what came first, the inspiration for the character or the inspiration for the setting, because it seems they're so intricately connected.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, definitely the setting came first. And interestingly, the setting seems to come first with every one of these books that I write. When it's time for me to sit down and come up with a new plot for the next book in the series, the first thing I think about is where do I want this book to take place? So one of them was very much inspired by Carlton Island, a little bit off of Cape Vincent. And another one was inspired by this new one, Devil's Oven Island. So a lot of this new book takes place on Devil's Oven Island. And others have been inspired by Alex Bay. Alexandria Bay plays a very large role in all of the books because that's Shayna's new hometown. So she gets to know the community. She looks behind closed doors with the neighbors, and she discovers there are a lot of secrets in this area, as there are, I think, in all small towns. And because of her past experience with this serial killer, she also has this situation where she's kind of running from his ghost, like the presence is still very much a part of her life even though he's no longer around. So she is trying to find a place for herself in this community, but as we learn over the course of the series, she has a connection to the serial killer. They have a blood tie, I will say, because I don't want to spoil too much. And because of that, when that information ultimately goes public, the community is a little bit wary of her, and she is with the state police force. And so she's present. She needs to investigate crimes that occur in the area. But at the same time, because of her kind of scandalous connection to this serial killer, the locals are really not sure whether or not they should trust her and accept her. And so in this new book, which is Devil's at the Door, the premise is that her 16-year-old niece moves from Vermont to come and live with Shayna and her fiance, who's also with the New York State Police, for the fall semester. And it's because this information about their family's tie to this notorious killer has gone public. And so Shayna takes in her 16-year-old niece and is hoping to kind of help her turn her life around and get her back on track. She's very impacted by the publicity around this situation. Except what ends up happening is Shayna discovers her at the scene of a suspicious drowning on Devil's Oven Island. And then she starts to question how much she really knows about her niece and whether maybe the local kids have a kind of morbid fascination with her niece's connection to this killer.
Right, so that element is really interesting because it's sort of like everyone, you can't run away from your past, and
Right.
or everyone's families have secrets. I really like that element. One thing that I thought was done really well, and is the incorporation of Alex Bay life. People that live up here and are from this area, and then we sort of know what it's like. I put myself through college working at a resort in Alexander Bay. One of my friends lived on an island, and we'd go over there and hang out. And and how the seasonal stuff is really working. Walton Street is mentioned in there. I love the Walton Street Market is still around. And I think what's really interesting about that is that it has a feel that I haven't really seen in other books. And I think that's why you probably get a lot of local readers, but I think people from outside the area are kind of intrigued about sort of this town. And can you talk a little bit about how the location makes it really easy to have secrets and murders and mysteries and isolation?
Yeah, definitely. And I will say you're absolutely right. The whole series seems to really resonate with both locals from the area and people who have never even heard of the Thousand Islands
Right.
before and are just fascinated by this notion that there could be this place not too far away in upstate New York where people actually live on islands. And it's so interesting to so many people that I encounter kind of on my, at events and on book tours. But I grew up in a small town in Quebec, and I noticed there too, just as I said, in any small town, there's this impression on the surface of things being sometimes very idyllic and kind of quiet and sleepy in these small communities. And I just have always been drawn to the idea, and also to other books that play with this idea as well, of these secrets behind closed doors, of you really don't know what your neighbors are up to. You really don't know about their past and their past relationships and the dynamics between them and others in the community. And that's something that has been really interesting to explore through Shayna's point of view, because she's a newcomer to the community. She's kind of an interloper, right? And in Devil's at the Door, it's the same for her niece, who is new to town. And so for them, they're really trying to suss out what's going on in this community, and who's connected to whom, and what all these past, friendships really mean to relationships as they exist today. So that's always been really fun for me to explore. And because it's in this small community, in this village setting, I think it gives, for a crime novel, this sense of almost claustrophobia sometimes, right? Like you can't escape your neighbors. You can't escape what's going on right down the street, which I think, again, it's really a compelling notion if you're trying to write a kind of creepy murder mystery.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it definitely has the feel of some other things I can think of is the series that was shot in Quebec, of Three Pines. I don't know if you've
Yes,
seen that,
I
right?
love
It
that
has
series.
that feel sort of like, we always know that there's weird people in the city. We always know that there's your neighbor could be a murderer in the city, but we don't think about that in a small town. And I think it sort of, it brings along the fact that, humanity is pretty similar, but just you can't really get away from it in a small town. Like if you have a beef with somebody in a small town, you run into them all the time. So I like
That's
that element of it. And I love all the references to Alex Bay. Um, and do the other novels all take place on a specific island or in the town?
So some of the locations are fictionalized, but they are all based on real
Right.
places. So I have a different name for Carlton Island, which comes up in the fourth book in the series, The Kind to Kill. There are locations like restaurants that will be very recognizable to readers who know the area, but I've changed the name. And mainly there are two reasons for that. I like to give a sense of authenticity, for sure. I love myself as a reader, I love to pick up a book that's set in a place that I'm familiar with and try to point out the places that I know and that I've been to and see if the author got it right. So I do try to do that as much as I can. However, if a crime takes place in a certain location, like let's say in close proximity to a business, I would never use that actual business name because I don't want to cause problems, of course, for that business and, you know, their ability to continue bringing in customers. So I do sometimes change the name of places, but in the very first book, I have an island called Tern Island, like Tern like the bird. And that is based on, if you know that greenhouse on Cherry Island, that's part of Cherry Island. That was the house that inspired the home in Death in the Family, the first book in the series. But I changed the name of the island. I changed the configuration of its location a little bit in the river, just because I needed it to be a little bit farther away from shore to kind of create more tension and make it more difficult for Shayna and her team to get back and forth to the mainland when they were investigating a crime. So I do take some creative license and play with the area a little bit, but for sure it would be recognizable to people who know it well.
Yes, and I love the whole thing about the boats. Like, you know, somebody can't be a suspect if they can't drive a boat. I remember my first job out of college, I worked and I had to learn how to drive a boat in the Thousand Islands. I'm like, I can't drive a boat. And so I like this idea that, like, you know, maybe a suspect is a suspect because they can drive a boat or somebody can't drive a boat. And, you know, I bet a lot of people in Alex Bay know how to drive a boat. So anyway,
For sure. Yeah. And those aspects of the area that are really unique to it, I try to lean into those too, because I find them so fascinating. The idea, like in this one, there's a whole bit about how the local teenagers all know how to drive boats, right? And they can get back and forth to Devil's Oven Island. The whole premise here is that they party on Devil's Oven Island after dark, which of course they're not supposed to do. And in real life, there are signs now that I think it used to be a place where people would go and spend time, but now there are signs that say no trespassing. Well, the teenagers in this book ignore those signs and they spend time over there because it's close to the mainland. It's easy to get to by boat or by sea-doo. But when they get there, it's very private. They can hide away from their parents. They can get up to all kinds of nefarious kind of behavior on that island. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just, it's like absolute gold for me as a crime writer to be able to have access to places like that I know and that I've spent time around that I can then incorporate into the stories.
Oh, definitely. I don't think unless you've been in this area, you've been out in a boat and you literally see there are thousands of islands and there's coves and there's places. I mean, when I grew up in this area, there was always some place you weren't supposed to go and you went there and you weren't supposed to be there, you know, and you secretly crossed the border and I'm in Canada now, haha, big joke,
Yeah,
so it's like, you probably can't do that as often as you used to, but yeah, that's what I really like about it. It has the authenticity. And just one more quick sort of discussion. What keeps you coming back to this character? The protagonist, and what kind of inspiration did you find for that, and why is it so important to have female driven crime literature?
That was a goal for me with the first book for sure. The first book I actually didn't intend for it to become a series. It was written as a standalone. It was written actually as kind of an ode to Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, which is one of my favorite golden age detective novels, that has Clue, like the board game Clue has a lot of those Clue vibes, or like Knives Out, the movie, which came out a couple of years ago. That's the kind of story that I wanted to write. And when I sat down to think about, of course, the setting was obvious. I knew I wanted to make it in the Thousand Islands, but when I sat down to think about who the protagonist would be, I immediately wanted it to be a female protagonist, because even today, you just don't see all that many female detectives. And I knew too that I wanted it to be a character who was both very competent and very good at puzzling out mysteries and really, good at her job and at the investigations, with methodical about it all, but also who had some vulnerabilities to her character, which is why I came up with this backstory of her having been abducted while working on a case. So throughout the series, she's struggling with PTSD. She's struggling with anxiety. She's not perfect. She doesn't make all of the right decisions all of the time, but that's true of everyone. And that's even true of detectives and homicide detectives and investigators of all kinds, right? Everybody is human. Everyone has their kind of foibles and make mistakes sometimes. And I've heard from readers over the years that that's one of the things that draw them to Shayna and keep them coming back and make them feel connected to her, is that she does make sometimes decisions that even will frustrate readers because it just feels like the wrong choice, but there's a reason to it. There's a method to her madness. And then in the end, you really get a greater insight into her character. And so by the end of every book, you know her a little bit better. You know her kind of entourage, her team, the person she's romantically involved with. The sheriff, who I will add, because I love to mention this, is based in part, at least professionally, on former Jefferson County Sheriff Colleen O'Neill, who over the years has been very kind to give me a lot of information on what it's like to work in law enforcement up in in the area. So yeah, you get to know them a little more with every story and feel a little more invested in their lives.
I know Colleen really well. She and I worked at the same resort that I
I
mentioned
think I remember
earlier,
you
which I
saying that.
will
That's so
not
fantastic.
mention, but I know Colleen really well.
Yeah.
Great person. Yeah, and I think people don't want the perfect protagonist anymore. People want the flawed protagonist.
Yeah.
We're kind of over that stage. I mean, I think one plus of the content that we're getting a lot of today is that people want to identify with somebody, and you can't identify with anybody as perfect. And we don't really want to see that. So just to plug it again, this is Devil's at the Door, but there are 4 other books in this series. It's being released officially on Tuesday, December 5th. So in the text of this article, I'll put links in places where you can buy it. If you happen to see this before the 2nd, pop into Clayton for the parade, which will be a really cool event. And
Yes, I'm looking
Tessa, I'm
forward to
wishing you
it.
all the best of luck with your
Thank you.
books.
Thank you so
And
much.
we love having content about this area. I think it's one of the last places left in the country where people aren't writing about regularly. So keep it up. We're happy about that.
Well, honestly, it's an honor to be able to write about it. The area means so much to me, and I'm just thrilled that people continue to discover the books and care about the characters and be excited about the series. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about it.
Well, thank you for joining us, and like I said, all the best.
Thank you.